starting.
Oh, it's live.
This ain't
Well, it
no
does say
country
live.
club either. All right.
It's still not on the webpage.
Third.
I can
Live
hop
stream-
back here.
This live stream is starting soon.
Oh, here we
Which
go.
is good.
I see him.
Soon is good.
It's like a second behind. This is weird.
Oh, there we are.
Can you show it on the screen?
Probably. That's kind of weird though.
All right, you ready?
No. There we go. Do you see my screen?
Hello. Yeah, I see it. That's kind of weird.
Now we're really in deception.
Now let's just hope. Let's just hope the recording audio.
So
Works
we
pretty
can
well.
share screens.
Yeah, but we can't.
We
Hold
can't
on.
do a lower third.
Now we can. I'm sure
Nope,
because
it still doesn't work.
of course it works now. That's all we know.
We have one concurrent viewer.
That's me.
Our friends at Google.
All right, we ready to go?
Yeah, I'm turning it off because that's going to get awful annoying to keep hearing myself a second later.
All right.
Oh wait,
Let's
maybe,
roll.
maybe I should tweet it out too.
20
Sure, go ahead.
seconds.
Tweet it. What's the? Oh,
It's midnight. Who are you tweeting to?
dude, all of our peoples.
I know. I should post it to my feed.
You should post it on Facebook, man. Because someone seems to keep liking it on Facebook.
Who uses Facebook?
I don't know. Somebody keeps liking us on there.
Facebook has fake news.
No, the internet has fake news.
That's what I heard.
Showing it to you.
I saw an article on Google Plus that said that Facebook had fake news.
What's the link for the YouTube? Oh, there it is. Dun, dun. Lower third.
All right, we should do this.
Should.
Ready?
Chris is tweeting.
I'm working on it. Oh man, it's just
Tweet.
taking.
We had an hour and a half. You could have done this.
I know. I should have had it ready, right? Shows you what I know.
Chris is our social media expert, our
Yes.
PR department, marketing.
Something like.
I'm the angry coder. I'm just here to be angered.
Right.
Urgh.
I'm
If it wasn't
post-production.
invented 15 years ago, it's crap.
Exactly. I haven't used it for 15 years. Oh, the keyboard. How quaint.
Seriously, 7 minutes until midnight. We should just wait. It's good luck. Then I'll have to change the intro. We're recording it on the morning of November 22nd.
It's still evening or late night. We have West Coast, man. I've always used that rule. Did I tell you something's done at midnight? It's midnight Hawaiian time.
It's 5 o'clock.
It's a whole like another 8 or 10 hours.
All right, ready to tweet. Why do I have to click that?
Oh no,
That seems redundant.
that's Twitter changed too.
There it is. There it
We'll
is.
wait.
Yeah, we'll wait because that's gonna make the difference. That right there. Okay,
All right, are we good?
I'm ready to record when you are.
All I want is the lower third, damn it.
All right. I'd like to
Lower
call.
third.
I'd like to call for a moment of silence. 20
what?
moments. 20 moments of silence.
For what? Just for
Silence for audio quality.
Oh yeah, I
We
forgot
care
about
that on
All
this
right,
show. Unlike other shows.
We want to
All right,
make
ready?
audio quality great again.
Ready.
Yep.
Ready to hold my breath.
Go.
Oh damn it!
You had one job.
It doesn't. If for some reason it fights me on the recording thing. Okay, it's recording.
Wait, no. Let me restart. Oh god. A second. It wasn't the noise too. It was him going, "Oh god."
All right,
Okay.
so here's what we should do. We need to like clap or something to sync up.
No, we don't. It's just
Okay.
when
He
when
just says something, and we hit the record button.
Yeah, I'll fix it in post.
Ready?
All right, go. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void Podcast. I'm Jess Chadwick,
I'm Todd Snyder.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
and we are your hosts. We are recording this on the evening of November 21st, 2016. And for those of you who have been following the show for a while, you may have noticed that we actually went completely dark for about 3 months now. Mostly because I got busy running a brand new tech conference, creating a new lynda.com course on .NET Core, by the way. Check it out. And then I went and had a third kid.
Yay.
Yeah, so, that's been taking up my time. But now she's almost 3 months old, and so I actually get to sleep again. And so instead of sleeping,
Yay.
hop on here with you. So
Now that I
Chris.
can sleep again, I decided not to.
I'm able to sleep
She's
again.
3 months old and wants to
choose
see a
not
podcast, so let's go.
So Chris, Todd, what have you been up to?
Yeah, so what have I been up to? Well, recently, I was fortunate enough to be awarded, if you're watching on YouTube, this .NET Challenge coin from the .NET Foundation,
Nice.
which is for contributing to an open source repo in the .NET Foundation stack of stuff. And for me, it was the ASP.NET docs. So, the backside of the coin here, any developer, any platform, any application with the robot on the back that I'm just going to call Fritz. But anyways, get yours. Go contribute to .NET. It was kind of fun. I added to the docs back in the beta days to talk about how to install .NET Core on Linux. And that was cool for me because I wanted to just learn a little bit more about using .NET on Linux, and dove back into Linux for the first time in at least 10 years when I did it. So it was cool.
Todd, you got anything interesting?
No, I've been mostly just playing around with the wonderful world of JavaScript and the different frameworks out there. I've been doing some research on Redux and Flux and trying to figure out if they're worthwhile frameworks to be using on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, Flux and Redux have been show topics that have been kind of in our queue for a while. So we're definitely going to be getting back to that, I think.
Yeah.
But tonight, we're going to be talking about Visual Studio.
The
In
family of
quotes,
Visual Studio.
right? Yes. Visual Studio in quotes, because now that seems to mean like 20 different things,
Yeah.
right? Like, is it an IDE or is it a text editor or is it just like an entire online ALM solution? Chris, I know that you've used all of those things. So, what's your
all
take
the
on
Visual Studios. Yeah. So the one that I haven't used yet is the brand new Visual Studio for Mac, just announced last week.
brand new, but version 7.0.
Right. But sort of not.
It is. It's Visual Studio for Mac 7.0.
Is that
7
really
is
what
the
it
new
says?
one. Didn't you hear this? Come on.
Well, that's what you do, right? Like, so, and then we also heard last week that that VS, the code named VS15 is Visual Studio 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that means next year, right?
Yes.
And then we also have Visual Studio Code, and that's the one that I've actually been spending quite a bit of time with. I think a lot of people have. It's an editor that I believe is based on the Electron shell. So when it first came out, it felt just kind of like using a simple text editor, like say a Sublime Text or an Atom. In fact, probably shares a lot with Atom, including a lot of the key bindings and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really grown from then, because when it first came out, it definitely was a text editor that was pluggable.
Well, it was. You mentioned it was the Electron.
Shell,
shell, right?
So
Which
they
is
could get
literally
the cross-platform Linux,
that was
Mac, and
Atom.
Windows support. Yeah,
right. Electron came directly from Atom.
right. So that's how you get a code editor that works in Windows, Linux, and Mac. And just like the common pattern in these other code editors, you don't open a project file, you just open a folder, and boom, that's your project or what you're working on.
Yeah.
And it does a really good job of hooking into the file system, so that when if you add files from some other source, they just pop up, which is something we didn't used to get in Visual Studio, of today. Or what do we call it? Visual Studio Classic?
I call it the Cadillac version, actually.
Yeah, Visual Studio Cadillac, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's really, I remember when it first came out, one of my frustrations was it had Node.js support, which was cool. I thought that was cool, except that if you wanted to try out the new .NET Core stuff and debug it, that didn't work on Windows, but it worked in Linux and Mac.
Ironically,
That is all rectified now.
Yeah.
So you get, and it has a lot of other support. Like last week, they just announced like some SQL support, and
That's
I think that there's PowerShell editing and much, much more. I mean, other people with other languages are adding stuff. There's an Elixir extension that does some syntax highlighting, and I would love to figure out how to wire up Elixir to it so that it, like, I could debug the code, I could compile the code, and then like do squigglies, like say it was ESLint or something. That's something I kind of want to figure out how to do. But yeah, that's Visual Studio Code, like the lightweight, not an IDE editor, but you can still get your work done.
Yeah, right. Well, what is that, right? Like, I've been asking this question for years. I was a big Sublime Text user for years. When Atom came out, it seemed pretty cool. It was a while for it to get to Windows, because for a while it was just on Mac and Linux.
Right.
But I just always wondered, even with Sublime Text, you can go and you can get all these extensions, which Visual Studio Code, I think it was about a year. I have no idea, but it seemed like a long time where it didn't have the ability to have extensions. So Atom, which it came from, it was literally the shell of Atom allowed for extensions, but then Visual Studio Code didn't allow for them, and so, which was kind of frustrating. But then finally they did. And so now there's like this really powerful ecosystem. I actually created one, which maybe we'll get back to that. But, it's really extensible. And so it's always raised the question for me of what is the difference between an IDE and these really powerful text editors that allow for extensions and provide language support and even an integrated debugger, literally integrated debugger. So what's the difference between an integrated development environment and the integrated development debugger into a code editor? So, I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. But, I mean, Todd, so as I understand it, you're not a huge Visual Studio Code fan. You prefer the full couple of gig experience.
Couple of gig of
memory.
A couple of dozens of gigs.
I love my Cadillac experience.
Yeah, you like to install about 30 gigs worth on your hard drive, and then
have you done select all in VS 2017? I think it's over 50.
And then you need about 8 gigs of RAM on your machine in order to run it. Yeah.
8.
And of course, if you're enough development, you need 2010 version, 12, 15, now 17.
Takes about 20 or 30 seconds to start up.
If you're comfortable with the not responding experience, 8 gigs is fine.
My favorite message of all time in any application ever,
busy?
Visual Studio would say, it would pop up a modal dialog, and you weren't allowed to do anything. It would say, Visual Studio is waiting for a background process to complete.
Right.
Hold on. Wait.
Which we put in the background.
Right.
That's why we put it in the background.
It's in the background.
Because we didn't want it to get in your way.
But you can't click this modal dialog because we're background process is still running. Yeah, that's a classic thing.
That's the one you prefer?
Yes. So, yeah, back on topic here. Yes. I mean, I have used Visual Studio Code. I use Sublime. But typically, I've only used them for very lightweight, like, hey, I want to edit an HTML page, or I want to do some formatting of JSON data or something. Something very lightweight. If I'm doing my normal day-to-day development stuff, I just use Visual Studio. It does what I need. It's quick. It's easy. Within seconds of then loading 8 gigs of memory, it does everything I need. And when I kind of look at the IDE experience, I kind of feel like it's just Microsoft making it easier for non-Microsoft people to work in this environment.
With code, with Visual Studio Code.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the greatest things about this new ecosystem, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio, I guess we just stop with that, is I have no idea how we're going to Google for anything. Like, I really don't know. If you want to find out how to do something in Visual Studio Code, Googling Visual Studio Code doesn't actually help you, because that's a pretty common term.
Yes.
And you can
end up put it in quotes.
Yeah, you can end up anywhere. So,
well,
so
even
like
worse, most people on the internet call it VS Code. They don't even call it
VS Code. Right. And the Twitter handle is code. And if you want to start it, it's just code dot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just
But we love our
technically-
editors. We're
No,
having
it's cool.
fun. But
And look, there's no question that what you get in 2017 that you're not going to get in VS Code is just the absolute litany of designers. And I mean, there's a profiler, and there's code coverage, and test explorer. And look, I'm not even scratching the surface, right? If you start adding some popular extensions, all the Roslyn integration in there. Forget, let's say you don't even have ReSharper, but you want a ReSharper-like experience. Well, there's tons of Roslyn refactorings that bring up nice little windows. And I see features like that slowly making their way over in extensions, but I don't know that the plan is ever for it to be fully baked. Like, that's a lot. And then it would be just as heavy as Visual Studio.
would it though? Would it really? I mean, because Roslyn now is a game changer just all around, because Roslyn does this stuff and it does it really quickly, right? So what the Visual Studio had the onus of doing all this reflection and everything kind of in real time, but now it's just built into Roslyn, and Roslyn is compiling your stuff more or less on the fly anyway. And so while it's doing that, it's like, well, let's just save some metadata and we'll have it, right? Yeah. And so it's not running as a background process just to provide the IDE or the
IntelliSense and stuff.
Yeah, it's not just to provide that. It's kind of like an output of like, well, I compiled it, but yeah, by the way, here you go. Here's that information too that you can use for IntelliSense or whatever you want. So it's just there.
So when I look at with how I understood originally why they had created code other than to compete with Sublime and stuff, was this idea that a lot of people in the JavaScript world were starting to move towards something like WebStorm or something of beyond just the editor experience. They wanted a debugger and something much more lightweight than Visual Studio.
I don't think. No, I mean, I think WebStorm and IntelliJ, I would consider them IDEs. I don't think that's really controversial to consider them that. In that they are big, and by big, big installation footprint, big memory footprint when you load them up, but also the power, the features that come along with it. But I take issue with your assertion, Chris. I mean, it's logical to think that the more features that you add to these extensions, regardless of the fact that they're hosted in a small and fast text editor, the more features you add, the slower they become. But I haven't seen it, right? Because
but how far away are we? And this isn't a bad thing. But how far away is a decked out Visual Studio with, let's say you're going to profile an app, or you're going to have app insights, because application insight stuff is built in, or when you start an ASP.NET debugging session now, it'll bring up CPU usage and memory usage.
I don't use any of that stuff.
And that's
on
fine.
A regular basis.
And that's totally fine. I'm not saying to you, you're a terrible person for not using it. I'm just saying that it's a long way away from VS Code having any of those features, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah, right.
Does it need them for does it even need them for day-to-day work? I don't know. Right? I mean, I've been doing, let's put it this way, I've been doing .NET Core out of habit in Visual Studio Code more than I have in the full IDE.
And why is that? What is the why are you doing that?
I'll tell you the main reason is that I feel I have had trouble with the preview tooling in Visual Studio, to where like something doesn't work, or it breaks, or maybe I just don't know how to use it, or maybe it isn't completely wired up yet. Whereas, they're building .NET Core from the CLI up, I believe. Now that's a statement coming from me, but it's just what I see. If you're going to build this cross-platform .NET, you've got to have a great command line system. Otherwise, you're screwed. Yeah. So that means to me, it's being built from the bricks up, and the foundation is just sort of, it's kind of baking now, and the tooling is still preview, right? There is no RTM tooling for .NET Core, and that won't happen until 2017 ships. So that's my primary reason for saying that's why I live in VS Code. But what it is doing is it's getting me used to that lifestyle, and I wonder when VS 2017 is ready in RTM, it'll be interesting to see. Like, I'll go back and take a look. But then part of me say like, wow, I can just bring up code and it's quick and I'm ready and I'm running. Yeah. And I can go over to a Linux box and
I think that to me that's the game changer, right? I mean, there isn't today a Visual Studio for Linux. Who knows? Someday them.
Right.
One of the things I was
there kind of is. I mean, there's mono.
yeah, maybe there's mono stuff, but not the branded Visual Studio
or mono developed. Sorry.
Yeah. I kind of look at that somewhere where this can play more. Like if I'm on a development server and sometimes you need Visual Studio installed to debug things or maybe things you need. If I can install code, it's much more lightweight. I'm not installing the 4,000 gig Cadillac version of Visual Studio. So I think there's a place for it there. I think what Chris has talked about is something interesting. I've had a number of developers talk to me and ask me questions around, all right, I'm starting to use code when I'm doing core. Can I, if you're in a team environment, could you have it that some people are using Visual Studio and some are using code? Does that work?
Totally. Especially if we're talking a lot about .NET projects and specifically .NET Core. Right now, it's .NET Core, right?
Yes.
Because it's this new ecosystem that's cross-platform and everything. And so when we're talking about .NET Core support, the ability to not only edit and compile within Visual Studio Code, the .NET Core code, but also get IntelliSense and CodeLens. I mean, you get the full,
mini CodeLens.
Yeah, it's not really mini. I mean, it looks. To your point, it is right. It's not as full featured as the one
that's in the VS CodeLens, but that's again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm saying it is like you say. Hey, it's telling me how many references I have for this thing, but maybe it's not telling me how many unit tests are passing. Well, okay.
So my point is
we will pretty soon.
The thing that's powering all of that is OmniSharp, right? It's a completely separate extension called OmniSharp, and OmniSharp is much broader than VS Code, right? So VS Code is just one of the extensions that the OmniSharp product or the project produces, and so you can get integration. You can get plugins for Atom or I believe Sublime Text.
Sublime's on the list.
Yeah, because what it is, it's just Node. So OmniSharp is just a Node server that's sitting there, and it's basically out of process. So now the net effect of that is, rather than Visual Studio opening up and doing everything in process in those background tasks that I like to talk about, you now have another process that's kind of kicked off in your editor as well. So, I mean, to your point, Chris, yes, I could see as you add more and more of those, then it starts to get bigger, but they get kicked off as you need them, which maybe that's what Visual Studio does too, the full blown. But sometimes, usually it just kind of loads it up.
Here's an interesting question. Is Visual Studio Code a new thing, right? I mean, you could say an editor is like Notepad++. In some degrees, that's an editor or Sublime.
It's been around forever.
Yeah. And there's other ones, Code Warrior, a bunch of them out there for a long time. It seems like Visual Studio Code is mixing of both, right? I got the debugger experience, I got the editor experience, but it's more than just a code editor or more than just a file editor.
Well, what it is Notepad++ is the kind of the oldest one that I'm aware of.
There's Text Plus. There's a bunch of men out there.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going back to Vim and all that stuff because I think they've had some some integrations too. But
some people still do that today.
Yeah, no, I mean it's been around forever. Like you've been able to bind keystrokes in Notepad++ to say shell out to a build command or something, right?
Yeah.
It's always been configurable. I'm not really sure about IntelliSense. Maybe highlighting and maybe code completion and stuff. But the big thing that Visual Studio Code offers or kind of brings to the table and moves that whole thing forward is that it feels as integrated as Visual Studio. IDE, right? IDE, integrated development environment. Now you're not just shelling and starting a new command process and, you want to see the result of it, go look at the command prompt that it's running in. No, it actually brings the result of that back and it integrates it back into the editor. It integrates Visual Studio or Get source control. It integrates the debugger, the full-blown debugger with breakpoints and everything. So I don't know. It just feels a whole lot like full-blown Visual Studio, but it's lightweight.
Well, it's kind of a return to some days that I don't think we've seen in the Microsoft world a long time. I think it has been a very long. I have to think back all the way to like MFC, to when I saw developers who would say, I'm going to use a different editor and, like you said, configure it so that when I hit a button, it shells out, calls the C++ compiler. Yeah. When we got to the Visual Basic 6 and .NET timeframes,
Yeah.
I feel like that stopped.
Yes.
For the most part, yeah.
Because
And just
Visual
about
Studio,
everyone just started going, I've got to use Visual Studio because either you wanted the designers, or it just got to the point where it was doing so much for you that why would you want to configure all that yourself?
even apart from the designers, it was the best in breed IDE. I still think it's the best in breed
definitely.
IDE. I've always said that. And so when we're talking IDE, I'm still, it might sound like I'm hating on full blown Visual Studio, but I still say that it's best in breed IDE. I'm just really questioning for any IDE, like why wouldn't you just go and use the lighter weight text editors with a bunch of extensions? And I think both of you have kind of answered that in different ways. One of the big draws is designers. Like designers, it's very unlikely that they're going to come to any of the text editors. What's that?
I'm perfectly fine with designers not coming.
I've never used a designer, so I don't care about that.
I'm very rarely ever.
Yeah.
So,
Unless I had
Well,
to.
designers don't have the place in the Windows ecosystem that they used to.
Yeah.
Right.
When it was web forms and WinForms, they had more of a
You
place.
had to. You had to. You're not going to do that by hand. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the question. Since we're talking about down memory lane, think about what the experience was for web development before Visual Studio.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
InterDev, right? And InterDev was this wild, weird beast that you'd fire it up and getting debugging to work was like a hit and miss thing. To me, that's with Visual Studio, it just became so easy. Oh, I have 5, and all of a
Right,
sudden I'm
sure.
debugging my JavaScript,
Yep.
I'm debugging my web server. Before I had to attach processes and all this other crazy stuff.
But HTML and JavaScript editing in Visual Studio, even up until I think
even now it's kind of still suspect.
2012. No, but I mean, it was awful. It was god awful until 2010, 2012, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's
it really started. Yeah.
But again, for most people back in 2000, 2001, what were you doing in HTML and JavaScript? Basic stuff. You weren't trying to do the stuff we are today.
But even then, it didn't really support that.
Yeah, but it was better in InterDev. InterDev was this weird editor that you had to basically use for classic ASP. So I guess to me, the question I get back to is, if I'm starting a brand new project, right, and I'm going to do ASP.NET Core, and I have a team of developers who've been using Visual Studio, should I continue to use Visual Studio, or where does code fit in?
Oh yeah, that's what you asked earlier, and I kind of took it over just to call out OmniSharp. But because of OmniSharp knows how to read the project file. First of all, there is no difference between a project, a Visual Studio, or a .NET Core project that you create in Visual Studio or with the .NET Core
editor.
command line, or the code editor. And so it all comes back to the project file still. And we're in a transition between, there was the project.json for a while, and they're going away from that back to an MS Build file, which we all know, see it literally a CS proj, which we all know and love, right? And so, and so the net result is you open it up in Visual Studio. You can open up literally that same exact project in Visual Studio Code. I believe you can even open them up literally side by side on the same machine, together at the same time, and edit it and see the changes.
And one of them is a little less obtrusive. Like when this is one thing that Visual Studio Code is doing that to me is sort of a nod to the open source ecosystem, is when you set up your debugging and your build experience in Visual Studio Code, it takes those settings files and dumps them in that .vs code. It's out of your way.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have to check it in if you really don't want to. This is totally a decision you could make, and it has no bearing on the project. Whereas in the Visual Studio land, the SLN is still here.
Yeah.
It remains to be seen if the tooling will pick up a folder without an SLN and just get smart enough to build it for you.
Yeah.
I haven't played with that.
Right.
I would kind of like to see that, and the reason is I would like to see our projects in the Microsoft stack, and let ASP.NET be the one that leads the way. Get more to a place where you can get them out on GitHub, open source project, and let people from all backgrounds and whatever their favorite thing is come and join in without feeling like you are nudging them to Visual Studio.
Yeah.
You want to use Visual Studio for Mac, you want to use VS Code, you want to use Atom. I don't care. I just want you to submit a pull request.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I mean, that's probably still the big difference, right? I mean, Visual Studio Code is an open source free product. While Visual Studio has community edition and stuff, most of us are using
Oh, yeah.
Professional or
Sure.
the MSDN version, which
You
is
don't
Exactly
need
what
to,
this
right.
podcast is about, is using it at work, right? So
Yes.
we probably have enterprise.
and that's not cheap. I mean, that's thousands of dollars a year or whatever the
Put money
current
in.
price is. I
Yep.
mean, it's significant money per year that
Yep.
companies invest in.
Well, but I mean, here's where I defend that, right? So if it's a small company, I believe it's five developers or less,
Yep.
and you can use Visual Studio Community, which is amazing. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
use. I have an MSDN license, right? So I can go and install Enterprise on my dev machine, on my personal dev machine, but I just go and download the Visual Studio Community right off the website because it's got everything I need. Because specifically, it supports extensions. We keep coming,
That was
we
huge.
keep coming back to that, right? So
Yeah.
I can install Community and then throw, ReSharper on there or whatever other extension that Mads is coming out with lately, and I'm good to go, and I don't need the enterprise stuff, especially on my personal machine.
So real quick before we get into talking about the extension stuff you made, which I think is the more interesting thing. Last week at Microsoft Connect, I can't keep track of their shows, but I think it's MS Connect or something. They
Right.
introduced several other versions of Visual Studio, or they're referring to the Visual Studio family. Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio Mobile Suite or something.
Visual Studio Mobile Center,
Mobile
which
Center.
looked to me like an online tool.
Yes, it looks like an online. I think we were talking before about Xamarin used to have a
Yeah.
testing
It felt a
environment.
lot like Xamarin Test Cloud.
So in according to the blog post here, they refer to it as a Visual Studio family. They have Visual Studio, which I assume is what we're calling Cadillac or Classic, Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, Mobile Center, Teams Services, and then eventually they had Azure. One of the questions I have is, there's so many things to learn. There's so many different tools out there. Now that they've introduced Visual Studio for Mac, will someday they introduce Visual Studio for Linux, and will code the ecosystem of code kind of not grow anywhere because there's a Visual Studio for all these platforms? Or is there always going to be a spot for Visual Studio Code?
That was the obvious question, right? Is how much longer before Visual Studio for Linux?
Yes.
And I don't know. I
guess the thing is we're talking about code or picking code as being an interesting tool to learn and use on a daily basis. One of the concerns I have is it's interesting and I would like to use it more, but if a year from now all of a sudden it never went anywhere, then I've wasted my time and I could have focused on something else.
It depends. You know, it's funny. I did hear that question get asked, and the spiel, I believe, that was returned was, it's not something they're focusing on because they find most developers do their day-to-day client work in either Windows or Mac. Okay. That sounds like a great marketing answer, right?
Yes.
Like, that's what you say because you don't have any announcements to make that day.
Yeah. I don't know. I tend to believe that, right? I tend to believe that's the bulk of developers.
Yeah, so you think that maybe having a full-blown Linux IDE client is not nearly as pressing as just making sure you have the support and code.
Yes.
Visual Studio Code.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, we know there's a ton of, I mean, heck, you see it when you, probably at your user group or Jess or at conferences, you see that Apple lit up on the back of people's laptops.
Yeah.
And now you're saying to them, here's a Visual Studio branded product. There was Xamarin Studio that was out there.
Yeah.
Do you think it made sense for them to say, let's take the heft of our Visual Studio name and just get it on Mac and make sure people understand that we're thinking of Macs as first-class friends, get in here?
I think it ties into their whole Xamarin mobile first strategy. Yeah, it makes sense to have it all.
And I think that's literally what it is. I think they rebranded Xamarin Studio because they own Xamarin now.
Right.
Yeah.
Xamarin Studio, Visual Studio for Mac is Xamarin Studio.
Now, I've heard different people mention that, and I've read through the blog post. They make it seem like that's not exactly what it is. They make it seem like it's a brand new thing.
I just went to Xamarin.com/Visual Studio Mac.
That's a mouthful.
So there's that.
What's the short link for that?
Yeah.
What's the bit.ly? So are they saying a different thing there?
No. They're not saying it either way, but I'm saying it's Xamarin.com. You're going to Xamarin.com and they're selling you.
At the end of the day, whether it's a brand new product or if it's a thing, it's basically replacing what that was. They had Xamarin Studio, now you have Visual Studio for Mac, which is mainly aimed at.
I think it's in transition,
right?
At least it's in transition, if not, because I think there are features. You can't leave your Xamarin population behind too, because
right.
Yeah,
I think sometimes maybe if you're not deep in the mobile game, you just don't realize what an explosive community. What word am I looking for? Expansive community the Xamarin community is. I mean, out of nothing, Xamarin Evolve became a huge conference.
Yes.
And in just a short amount of time became a huge product to the point that Microsoft had to pay.
Yeah. Millions. Like
Yeah.
big time.
Right.
Well, and so that's a great platform to build on top of then, right?
Sure.
If they did, and I believe they did, I'm not really sure, but if they did take Xamarin Studio and just rebrand it, then hey, look at that. You got all your Xamarin stuff, which is awesome, right? It's amazing. And then you can also say, file new project, new .NET Core web application.
Core.
Yeah, and it's
theoretically your team can work together, beautiful. Right? You could use your Mac, I could use my PC, somebody could use Linux Mint.
Right.
Everybody working together.
Everybody's happy. One big happy world.
But the thing
that
your
I
IT
was
really
people will love that everybody's on different machines, right?
The thing that I was looking for, what I was very eager to install it on Mac because there's a couple of key features, especially when it comes to working with .NET Core web applications, which I really like the context menu of adding the packages, right? So if I start with nothing and I want to start using ASP.NET MVC, I go and I just type, app.use MVC to register that middleware. I don't have a reference, so Visual Studio highlights it. It's an error. But then in full-blown Visual Studio on Windows, if you use that context menu, those quick actions, it says, hey, do you want to add the package Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC? Well, yes, that's exactly what I wanted.
That's what I wanted.
It does that reverse lookup to go and find, well, where is use MVC or add MVC, right? What package does that live in? And I'll bring that down. And so that was the first thing I did. I installed it on my Mac, and I opened it up, and I was ready to do it. Nope, it's not there, right? And so it's clearly not Visual Studio for Mac. It leads me to believe, in other words, there's not feature parity, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know why anybody would really expect that there was.
It's a beta version too, so
sure. It's a preview. It's not even beta; it's preview.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess again, getting back to the idea of code, is code just a different tool in your tool set? Does it have a place? Is there going to be certain developers who just gravitate towards code and never use Studio? What is
every time I have to open up full-blown Visual Studio, I literally let out an audible sigh. I'm just, all right, fine. I'll sit here and I'll wait 20 seconds for this thing to responding. So I can, So I can edit one file and build my app, right? And for me, very specifically, it is standard.NET, legacy.NET, ASP.NET applications, right?
Classic ASP.NET.
Classic ASP.NET applications where I had to load it up.
Yeah.
I mean, you can run MS-Build from the command line.
Hold on, let's call it right. ASP.NET 4.6.
0.2.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
So I live my entire life in Visual Studio Code unless I have to open up Visual Studio to open up one of these.
I've gotten used to. I'm telling you, I've gotten used to Git clone and then code dot.
Yeah.
Or
totally.
If I'm in Explorer, right click and say open with code. I'm with you on that. I want to do something quick. That's become my reflex action.
And it opens up in 2-3 seconds.
And that makes sense.
Now,
right?
I'll tell you what my audible sigh with Visual Studio Code every time I go install it somewhere. Not that I'm doing that all the time, but one thing that I do frequently is start with a bare VM. I might be doing it in presentations, or maybe just because I want to see document that whole experience for beginners. Mm-hmm. Is you install Visual Studio Code and you are ready to be a Node.js developer.
Yeah.
But you are not ready to be a .NET developer. You have to go install the C# extension.
Well, because it's a Node package, right? It's a different ecosystem.
But it didn't used to be that way. It used to be the C# extension was in the box, and then they pulled it out of the box. So the only thing in the box is you are ready to be a Node.js developer, but you want to be a .NET Core developer? Well, go get the C# extension. Now, I'll give the product credit. You go open a folder that has .NET Core stuff in it, and it starts yelling at you. It's like, I think you're editing .NET Core. It's almost, except for Clippy, that's the only thing missing. But up at the top, it's like, I'm pretty sure you need the C# extension, and you get it.
Click this button to install it. Just say yes. Yes. Click this.
It does. It all comes together. Yes. I agree. Yeah. So it's not horrible. It's not a terrible experience at all. I just find it amusing.
Well,
So-
right, and to be fair to the full-blown Visual Studio, I believe with 2017, I know that they've pared down the installer, so the install
yeah.
experience
There's
is
like
no longer.
workloads.
It's no longer, start it and then go home for the night and
Yeah.
come back and
Install
hope.
Well, it
everything
doesn't
in the
have to
kitchen
be.
sink and-
Like, if you just want web development,
Right, but
very
I
fast.
believe does that has a net effect on the actual startup time too, right? That it's just not installing so much stuff.
Yeah,
It's not installing a
initializing.
lot. They're deferring a lot of the startup stuff they used to like make us wait for.
So that's good.
Supposedly a better experience.
That just gets back to my question: what is the difference between full-blown Visual Studio and in Visual Studio Code? Right? What is a powerful editor, text editor with extensions, and a full-blown IDE? When the IDE is getting slimmed down and pared down so that it starts up and it takes up less memory, and the text editor is getting more and more features, which, Chris, to your point, probably means that it's slowing down.
Yes, there's an ecosystem.
Well, I don't want to believe for that because I agree it isn't the same
Connection
thing. I
point.
mean, Visual Studio, classic Cadillac, it's got a lot of common Win32 in there.
Yeah.
In its current form, is never going to Mac and Linux. It can't.
No,
You literally can't. Yeah.
It literally
barely
can't
got the Windows
happen,
10, right?
right?
All the
Which is
content.
ironic because it sounds to me, based on the little that we know about how Visual Studio for Mac was built, is that's the one that could technically go cross-platform.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't know, but some of the features they showed at Connect, I'm super jazzed about. I'm like, for me, I was a big fan of nCrunch, so seeing the live unit testing, that I just don't see that making its way into code anytime soon.
Why not?
Well,
Why not?
Okay, I'm not saying it can't happen, but it might be a fun project, right?
It's kick off a process, right? That's
Sure,
how
it's
that's
possible.
how Visual Studio Code works.
Yeah, kick off a process that's watching your code, running X unit tests or something.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you that it's possible. I just don't know. Maybe it'll show up. Maybe it'll get.
It's also much easier to build that extension. It's much easier for you. You being any given developer.
except me.
Any
I complained about
given
this prior to the show.
You
I-
as the plural you, not you as the individual
the
you.
royal you.
The royal you.
It's easier for us. It's easier for we. It's easier for us to go and create these extensions
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is.
for code.
It is.
But
it's more
I mean,
straightforward.
to be fair to full-blown Visual Studio, that's gotten easier over the years too. That's been very
Thank you, Mads.
difficult. But then Mads has come up with all these templates and everything that just do all the work for you.
Right.
You still need to learn their component model, the Visual Studio API, which is very, very kind of intense. But where I like extending Visual Studio Code is it's just Node. It's JavaScript and it's TypeScript. Visual Studio Code itself is written in TypeScript.
There we get to the point why you like it.
And now I love it.
And it's funny because when I try extending it, I don't even bother with the TypeScript.
And this is why his worked and yours didn't. You didn't embrace the
It's just JavaScript is fine. I don't
There you
understand.
go. No, but the template that they have for you is literally like, here's this method, right? Here's this function. When your extension loads up, it runs this function. This is your entry point, and there's actually a couple of them for the different kind of lifecycle events. But yeah, go nuts! What node code do you want to run in here? Go ahead and write it.
Now you can do that same thing technically with Visual Studio right now, right? You can run any node package through a task runner, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, like there's the task runner. That's true, but I don't think that's quite. I mean, like what Jess is saying is it's basically an out of process node runner.
Right. So, to be specific, you can write JavaScript code, node code that allows you to add IntelliSense, add custom IntelliSense, right? Add autocomplete options. The extension that I made that's in the market now is actually an implementation of what I just said earlier. The thing that was missing in Visual Studio for Mac, it was also missing in Visual Studio Code, which is that do a reverse package search for this. I go and I say, use MVC, app.use MVC, and if I'm running OmniSharp, OmniSharp will highlight it because OmniSharp runs on Roslyn, and Roslyn didn't know how to find that. It didn't know where to find that, right? Because I didn't have the correct reference, the correct package. And so I wrote an extension. If you highlight that thing, and I'm talking with the OmniSharp team. I'm actually going to try and actually get it integrated with OmniSharp. But if you highlight that thing and then run a custom command, which is part of the thing that you have to configure. Very easy to configure. It goes and it calls out to the web, that reverse package search thing that's on the web, comes back with all the package options, shows you a list in Visual Studio Code. You select it, and it goes and it adds it to the project for you, right? And so this is a couple dozen, 30-some lines of JavaScript code, of Node code that I'm actually, I'm able to see what is the highlighted text in the editor. I open up files, I edit them, I insert text, I save them, and I can even trigger like a build command after, or a restore command, right? Okay. After I'm done all of this, .NET Core wants you to go and restore the package so it's actually available and that error goes away. So, this is literally, 30-some lines of code. I did all of that in just TypeScript code. It's very easy. I mean, it took me all of like maybe a dozen hours to learn the API, and write the extension.
So if you were to write another extension, it would be 2 or 3 hours probably.
Yeah.
On the complexity of the extension. So
that's
to me
cool.
That's very powerful, because at least in my experience, it's been a few years trying to write an extension for Visual Studio was like calm hell.
Yeah, it's calm. That was the problem. It was calm.
And if you wanted to write something across different versions, then you had to deal with different APIs. It was a project.
Yeah.
It wasn't a hey, let me go create this thing for myself real quick because I need it.
I think at Build, I'll have to find it and put it in the show notes, because I think at Build, Mads, of course, did a talk where on stage he built an extension for Visual Studio. So he had this idea, but he saved it for on stage. Mm-hmm. And what was really neat about it is, besides just building it, he also kind of gave this really like tips and tricks thing where he said, hey, when I build extensions for Visual Studio, I use GitHub. And then when I check in, it automatically builds with AppVeyor. And then, and so basically he was kind of laying out the Mads tool chain for success, where he goes from check-in to build, running tests, continuous integration, and like off to the gallery.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a machine. There's no question. But I think that's valuable today. And I watched that and said, like, I have to bookmark this, because if I ever do say I want to write for an extension for Visual Studio, I know I'm coming back and watching this again.
Yeah. And hopefully it hasn't changed between now and then.
Oh, and you bring up, this is totally a side note. This is totally way off our topic, but you brought up AppVeyor. I did the same thing with creating a NuGet package. So the ability to just commit to your public GitHub repo, and AppVeyor is the continuous integration that's watching that repo, and it kicks off a build. And the result of my build that I set up was it actually bundles a NuGet package and publishes that package to the public NuGet. Right. And this is all free because it's a public repo. It's an open source project. And so the AppVeyor stuff is all free, which is amazing, because that was the big problem with me for managing my open source package, my open source NuGet package, was people would send pull requests, and then I would have to go, like, it's in the middle of the day. I'm at work, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Time to go.
I could merge the pull request, and so that new code just sits there, and it's not. Right. If it's not in NuGet, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And so then I'd have to like remember when I got home and go and like pull it down and build it manually and push it manually, which is just the worst thing in the world. Don't ever do that, right? And so I set this up on there, and it's just amazing. You merge the pull request, right? You automate everything, including the versioning, right? Increasing the versioning number.
That's cool.
So yeah, that's definitely my tip and trick is check out AppVeyor. And now that you brought it up, I don't even know why I didn't do that for my Visual Studio Code extension. I'm going to check that out too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's not exactly what we're talking about, right? But this idea of just automating everything in your build and deployment pipeline, it's just getting more and more appealing, because who has the time?
For me, it was appealing because it was free, right? This is an open source project. True. I don't really want to invest any money. I will if I have to, but I don't really want to. And so for these things to be free,
to do the work for you, then it makes sense. Yep. Plus, you also learn, right? I mean, you learned. By doing that, you learn how that stuff works and tied it all together, and maybe someday you can utilize some of that in your day-to-day work too.
Yep.
Well, Jess, it's funny. Like now you're giving me ideas for VS Code extensions that probably already exist. Is just go over to Visual Studio Cadillac, right, and say what's in here, I wonder how.
Why are you? Go back to the beginning of the show. Why are you opening up Visual
Yeah.
Studio, the full-blown Visual Studio?
There's some
Go and make
interesting ideas,
a Visual Studio Code extension for that.
like maybe if there's some I mean, I don't know, maybe even take like the code coverage stuff in Visual Studio and say not only might it be fun to try and extend VS Code to do some automatic unit testing and code coverage, but what if we could use some, maybe like a JavaScript library like HighCharts or something to graph stuff out?
Mhm.
It might be fun, right?
Yeah.
Or
And
just
you know
explore
what? Because CodeLens was kind of it was in Visual Studio Code to begin with, versus it was kind of tacked on in much later versions of the full-blown Visual Studio.
Yeah.
It is a first-class citizen in the API, right? There are methods in the Visual Studio Code extension API to say, show this and register this as a CodeLens provider, make
That's
a custom CodeLens provider, right? So you can actually go beyond, right? So this is the next version. This is the next step in my plugin, right? Not have to go and do anything, but actually, show the little bubble, show the CodeLens bubble, that, hey, I saw this on the reverse package search. Do you want to do this, right? And actually have the CodeLens of, go and do it or whatever.
So let me ask a question for you guys, since you guys have dived into code a little more. How much server-side debugging have you done, and is it the same experience, or am I losing something?
Totally the same experience.
So I get breakpoints and watches and all that stuff. There's no real difference.
Hover over the variable in the code, right there in the source code, and you get the value right there.
True.
No, it's
And it's still the F5, hit F5, you're up and running. You
Totally.
It's not really the immediate window. You just type into terminal.
Yeah.
You can do it. It's like
But
the
if you
immediate
reference
window.
other projects and stuff that steps into those projects that don't lose anything that I would normally get from.
Yep.
From kind of like.
Yep.
So we were talking a little bit about how it's a first-class Node code editor right out of the box. It's interesting in that both at work, online, and then just personally, I can think of 3 different people. One at work was like, this is not a Microsoft person. This is like a Java Node person.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, hey, have you seen this Visual Studio Code? It's a great Node editor.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
There's a gentleman online who has a great video series called Fun Function. And just this week, for the week, he did some work in Node and he fired up VS Code.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a Microsoft guy.
Well, I mean, ultimately, to me, that's the audience that will
Yeah.
gravitate towards this, because it is a powerful tool that they don't have to pay for, right?
Right.
They can taste the Microsoft experience without necessarily
Right.
coming.
And then I have a
Microsoft
friend
stack.
who's been learning the Node stack on a Mac, and he uses VS Code. And one of the things I asked him what he liked about it, and besides the other thing, he really did like the integrated debugging and how it just was all in the box. Where he said, coming from Atom, he had to remember all these packages to install, and then different authors had, well, this is my pipeline for Atom, and then another author, well, this is my pipeline
That
for
sounds
Atom.
like the typical
And-
non-Microsoft world.
And he was like, VS Code,
power
it just all works. And then second, when he opens up the terminal, it's the Mac Bash terminal. So it's something he wanted. It's what he wanted, basically.
And you're familiar with, which is ultimately the most important thing, right? If you're efficient with a tool, you're going to gravitate to keep using it. If it becomes a hindrance to use, or if there's a barrier, you're going to be like, I'm just going to go back to what I know.
So it's interesting to hear all these folks who are not in the Microsoft ecosystem telling me, yeah, my tool of choice is VS Code. That's interesting, but
Yeah,
not
definitely.
not to write .NET Core. Does that mean now that I then infect them and say, hey, let's do a little back end with .NET Core. Maybe it won't drive you as nuts as NPM and LeftPad.
Evil left pad.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, when you're asking about the debugging experience, my specific experience has been with Node apps, full-blown Node apps, and Visual Studio Code debugging. In other words, debugging my Visual Studio Code extension, which is effectively debugging a Node app, and debugging .NET Core. Those are the only 2 things that I've done. So just to be full honesty, full disclosure, it's not like I've tried about a whole bunch of debuggers.
And you could run .NET 4.6.2 code inside, right? In code?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So you
No.
have to be core.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've certainly never done it, but I don't think that you can. To the extent that you can edit full .NET code, you can certainly use Visual Studio as your code editor. OmniSharp certainly doesn't officially support it. It may have some support where it's just kind of guessing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing now is that OmniSharp it's supported .NET Core for forever. And recently we moved from the package JSON to the MS Build, or the CS Proj, which is an MS Build. So now OmniSharp understands MS Build. I would say, I would assume, I would hope that means going to the full .NET, at least understanding it. We're not that far off, right? Because now OmniSharp needs to understand the CS Proj format, at least the very basic one that .NET Core applications use now. And so it's just not that far away from the full-blown CS Proj. But you can open it up, you can edit your C# code, and then drop to the command line and run MS Build on your solution or your project, right? You can do that. It's not the integrated experience. Now you're back to like Notepad++, right? You can even tell Visual Studio Code, you can find a keystroke, a command to go and shell out and run MS Build on the command line. But then it's, basically the same exact experience that you're getting with doing the same thing in Notepad++. So it works, but for that experience, I'm just going to open up Visual Studio, full-blown Visual Studio.
Okay.
So I guess the unanswered question is full .NET Framework in VS Code, and what do we think of Visual Studio for Mac, which for me is an open question since I haven't installed it. Yeah. I'd be curious to see if people want to hear what we think about it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, definitely.
I installed Visual Studio for Mac. I did file a new .NET Core project, and I saw if you could do add MVC, and it wasn't there, so I literally just closed it right there.
I think Visual Studio for Mac, definitely the preview version is very aimed at the Xamarin audience.
Yeah. It looks a lot like MonoDevelop and Xamarin Studio, and yeah, I mean, it is what it is. For the 2 whole minutes that I was in there, it definitely had like IntelliSense. I don't know if it had CodeLens, but it definitely had IntelliSense. It was definitely a respectable IDE. I think I actually did hit F5 at one point to go ahead and run it.
Plus, you do everything right
and debug it. Yeah.
I think every time you hit F5, while you still can on a Mac.
Right.
Yes, this is true. Other story.
Yeah.
With Visual
that's
Studio,
another show.
every time I create an ASP project, the first thing is F5. Make sure the template worked.
Yeah. The other thing that we didn't talk about in this episode is the online Visual Studio, the Visual Studio Online, which
team services.
I teased that earlier, but I don't think we ever really intended to talk about that. So
I've used TFS in the cloud, and it actually works quite well.
Yeah.
And the experience is good. I've never done any of the unit testing stuff, but I've known some people. Chris, I think, didn't you do something with some unit testing?
So early back when it was still called Visual Studio Online, I did go end to end with it, and I was doing some talks on it for a little while. What my fear now is that I think it's evolved. I mean, we're talking 18, 24 months and a name change.
I mean, a lot of people are using App Harbor and some other things back then.
Proves that it has to be totally different.
Yeah.
Right.
It's probably better, but it would definitely be.
I really don't know, but from what I saw on stage at Connect, it does look like there are some new, more stuff exposed, on the web and the build pipeline stuff. And it just looks like the product's just gotten huge.
Well, that team is just churning out stuff. Yes. They're working on, I believe, 3-week sprints. So they're putting new code into production every 3 weeks. Whether or not they're turning it on for everybody is a different story, but they're pumping stuff out.
Yep.
I mean, I could definitely see at some point a lot of places potentially utilizing that for their build processes and stuff, even for internal applications. Because there's a lot of infrastructure you need today for getting TFS up and running, finishing a version of TFS, upgrading. I mean, I could see eventually reaching a point where some things where cloud services will be more adapted quickly is things like a build process or things that you may want to use tooling or need a lot of servers for as opposed to doing it homegrown.
Yeah, I mentioned AppBear before for the CI solution, the free CI solution. I believe you get access to Visual Studio Team Services for free too, right? There's a free version with some CI. I believe it's very restrictive though. I think it only comes with a certain number of hours per month, which is probably fine for a small open source project, but not for.
But if you're an enterprise and you're buying TFS, the whole product, and then paying the support stuff, the cost may be maybe negligible for you to consider it as a viable solution.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, now that we got that out of the way,
Yeah.
I think that's a show.
Covered all the Visual Studios.
We forgot to cover Visual Studio for DOS. Did you know that command line's back and cool, man?
Anyway. All right. And you, listener, what do you think? Do you prefer the full Cadillac version of Visual Studio? Or do you use Visual Studio Code or some other editor? Let us know. Please leave a comment on the website, staticvoidpodcast.com, or send an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com. Todd, Chris, thanks for the chat.
Yes, it was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Glad to be back again and talking with you guys again. And thank you, listener, for spending the time with us. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Static Void Podcast. Look at that. Right back into the swing of things.
Actually, it was one of our shorter ones.
It was. Under an hour.
We're getting good at this now.
Professional podcasters right here.
I
thought that was pretty good.
Take a break every 6 months.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty good.
It was actually quite good. I think we hit everything without getting too in the rabbit holes.
Didn't have a freaking outline to go by. We just winged it. Yeah, man.
I think there are better shows than the ones where we've done that, where we just kind of
Absolutely.
core.
Yeah.
Hey, here's something cool and interesting. What do you guys think? Have you done anything with it?
The topic was, I love how you two are the only subscribers to the new feed.
We were there first, man.
Chris and Todd have subscribed to you on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go find that drop. I want to find that part in Build where Hanselman and Miguel went back and forth on the naming because I think it would be perfect to outro. So I'll
that would
get
fit
that set up
perfectly
for
for what we're doing here.
All right. Let me copy this, upload it. I'm sure Chris already has the folder created. And then I'm going to go play Titanfall 2 for a little while.
Oh, you're playing Titanfall 2, huh?
Just started last night. I started the campaign.
You really are going back old school. You start playing Call of Duty too?
You know what? My buddy's trying to get me back on Call of Duty, but I'm not.
The one we used to play with? I can't remember his name. Let's call him Chris.
No,
But it's like Chris.
Brad? Yeah, Brad.
Yeah. What was the other guy?
We can probably stop podcasting because the internet doesn't care about this.
Why
Why not?
We used to